Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. We begin tonight with an update on the Khalistan story. It now features a secret memo, a Pakistani hand, an FBI chief, and a US congressional committee. It may sound complex, but it's the same old story of Western agencies and media joining hands to build pressure on another country. That's America's style. China is more direct. They'll ram their military ship into yours or fire water cannons at you. That's what they did with the Philippines this weekend. In India, the Supreme Court has upheld the government's decision to revoke the special powers to Kashmir. We'll not discuss the politics that followed. We'll look at how Jammu and Kashmir has done since Article 370 was abrogated. In Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif is campaigning on the plank of peace with India. We'll discuss why. In Egypt, Mohamed Morsi is set to win a third presidential term. We'll tell you why this election is crucial for the region and the world. In Africa, why regional powers are going soft on the coup leaders of Niger. In Gaza, a war that no one is winning and may lead to the creation of another Hamas. In Australia, why they want to cut down the number of immigrants by half. And the story of Monday blues. Are they real? How do you beat them? We'll discuss all of that. The headlines first. Poland makes a pro-EU turn. Donald Tusk set to become Prime Minister. In October, 3 pro-European Union opposition parties won a majority. This ends 8 years of rule by right-wing populists who often clashed with the bloc. Japan's embattled Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is likely to sack key ministers embroiled in a fundraising scandal. The row has dealt a fresh blow to Kishida's already sagging public support. Reports claim the opposition could move a no-confidence motion against his government. Things are not looking good for UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak either. He faces the riskiest week of his premiership. Lawmakers will decide whether or not to back Sunak's policy to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Tomorrow, the MPs will vote on the controversial legislation. United Nations mission in Mali officially ends after 10 years. Mali's junta, which seized power in 2020, had ordered the withdrawal. For the past decade, the UN mission had around 15,000 soldiers and police in Mali. UN chief urges COP28 to phase out fossil fuels. Saudi Arabia, the world's top oil exporter, and Iraq are opposing this plan. Antonio Guterres' plea comes less than a day before the climate summit ends in Dubai. And Greece bans football fans from matches till February. The government is trying to clamp down on violence at sporting events. Last week, a police officer was injured as rival fans clashed during a volleyball game. It was the latest in a series of such incidents in the country. The Khalistan plot is thickening. We've heard allegations, we've seen indictments, now there's a secret memo. 2 words you should always take with a pinch of salt. Secret memo. This one has been published by a US news outlet called The Intercept. And who wrote it? Well, according to them, the Indian government. I'll explain the details first. This secret memo was allegedly issued in April 2023. It was signed by Vinay Quatra, that's India's foreign secretary. It was sent to Indian diplomatic missions across North America. And what was the message? The Intercept says the crackdown on Khalistani elements. That's what the message was. Let me quote from what they've said. The pro-Khalistan organizations have become obviously more extreme. Their strategy has gradually shifted from narrative building to street protests. Concrete measures shall be adopted to hold the suspects accountable. The memo goes on. It says, India ordered a sophisticated crackdown scheme. It does not mention assassination or bodily harm, but it does say crackdown. Just one problem though. It has been rubbished by the government of India. The External Affairs Ministry has released a statement. Let me quote again. Such reports are fake and completely fabricated. There is no such memo. This is part of a sustained disinformation campaign against India. The outlet in question is known for propagating fake narratives peddled by Pakistani intelligence. The posts of the authors confirm this linkage. That's a strong statement, unusually strong for the Indian Ministry of External Affairs. They've not just questioned the report, they've also questioned the publication and its authors. India says the Intercept propagates Pakistani narratives. So what do we make of this latest saga? Well, the timing is important. Earlier today, the FBI chief landed in India. His name is Christopher Wray. He's already met the chief of India's Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI. He's also got meetings lined up tomorrow. Now, there's a lot on his agenda, like cyber crimes, intelligence sharing, and narcotics. But one issue will likely top all of it. That's the issue of Khalistan. Last month, the US accused an Indian national of an assassination plot. They also said an Indian government official was involved. The target was apparently this man, Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. He's a Khalistani terrorist with two hobbies. On weekdays, he organizes referendums for a Sikh state. On weekends, he threatens to blow up the Indian parliament. And who is shielding him? The government of the United States of America. In that context, this so-called memo is important. It will make the FBI chief's visit a bit more complicated. But beyond that, what are the implications? Well, it seems like New Delhi has drawn red lines. Just look at the reactions to Canada, the Intercept, and the US. Canada gave no evidence, so New Delhi lashed out. The US took the judicial route with an indictment. So New Delhi began its own investigation. And the Intercept? They published an unconfirmed memo that does not even mention assassination, then tied the whole thing to Hardeep Singh Nijjar and Pannu. So once again, New Delhi lashed out. What does that tell you? That cooperation is fine, wild allegations are not. But frankly, this is just the start. More publications will likely follow the Intercept. It's been a trend in American policy. Washington begins, the US media carries it forward. So New Delhi should be ready for that. And it's not just the American media. Politicians too are taking a tougher stand, like Democratic Senator Ben Cardin. He chairs one of the most powerful congressional committees, the one on foreign affairs. And Cardin included India in his recent hearings. And guess what the hearings were about? What this hearing was about? Targeting of dissidents abroad. Now, usually China and Saudi Arabia are discussed in such hearings, or Russia and North Korea. But this time, the committee also discussed India and listened to their comments.
We've seen disturbing allegations against an Indian government official for involvement in planning to assassinate a U.S. citizen in New York who was critical of the Indian government. This follows allegations of India's involvement in the killing of a Canadian Sikh leader earlier this year. The Modi government had labeled both critics as terrorists.
We often say we're the oldest democracy in the world and India is the largest democracy in the world. This is not the behavior of a respectable democracy.
Now, just to clarify, these Khalistanis are not critics. It's not like they were criticizing India's net zero climate target. They want to break India up. They are bona fide separatists involved in violent crimes and attacks against India. Some of them have been designated terrorists. Clearly, some US politicians do not understand that. Neither does the US media. So India should brace for such so-called leaks and memos. Think of it as an unofficial pressure campaign. Our next story is about Chinese bullying. This is not a report or an allegation. This is video proof. This weekend, the world witnessed it. How China rides roughshod over its neighbors, how it bullies them. Take a look at this. Allow me to explain what's happening here. That big white ship that you see belongs to China's Coast Guard. It is targeting a vessel from the Philippines. And this was not even a military ship. It belonged to the Bureau of Fisheries. Irrespective, China went after it. Let's look at all of this from another angle. Look at how close the Chinese vessel was, barely inches away. And then there was a collision. It happens again and again. Manila says it wasn't just one ship. China targeted another vessel with water cannons. Now, both ships were damaged. One of them completely broke down. It had to be towed away. These run-ins are dramatic and dangerous, but they're not new. China and the Philippines have a long history of it. But now they've become more frequent. And Manila says this latest incident is an escalation.
We choose to maintain our moral high ground. If they're going to choose to do that kind of barbaric attack to prevent the Philippine Coast Guard or the Armed Forces of the Philippines in completing our resupply operation, then let them be so.
So that's the position that Manila has taken. Despite constant provocations, they will not respond with force for now. China is testing their patience. It's a dangerous game to play, given that this is a volatile region, also highly militarized. This is the South China Sea we're talking about. That's where the collision happened. This region is tense with multiple players and many moving parts. The South China Sea is disputed. 6 countries and regions have overlapping claims. There is China and the Philippines, of course, plus there's Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei and Taiwan. All of them have competing claims. And China's claims are the most expansive. They say they own almost the entire South China Sea. So they've deployed ships here. And they attack their rivals with water cannons. The idea is to assert dominance, to enforce control over disputed waters. And China has amassed a large fleet for this mission. Do you know how many ships Beijing uses to intimidate Manila? As many as 400. They have deployed 400 ships for bullying, and these ships chase Filipino vessels and come close to their territorial waters. Basically, they're meant to provoke and threaten. And what kind of ships are these? They belong to China's Navy and Coast Guard. The rest are controlled by Chinese militia, also called Little Blue Men. The militia operates a number of ships. Now, we don't have the exact figures, but experts say there are hundreds of such ships. They look like commercial vessels, but they're controlled by Chinese militia and funded by Beijing. They in fact support the Chinese military. They act as enforcers. They patrol the disputed waters and ensure China's control on the region. These days, they're seen here, the second Thomas Shoal. It is part of the disputed South China Sea. There is a marooned and rusty ship here. It's called the Sierra Madre. This ship belongs to the Philippines. It was marooned in 1999, but Manila still keeps a handful of Marines here. Why is that? Why deploy soldiers to a ghost ship? Because this shipwreck is like a symbol, an outpost for the Philippines. It represents their claims in these waters. So they don't want to abandon it. It serves as a military base of sorts. Manila keeps a detachment of Marines here to monitor Chinese vessels. And like most remote deployments, these Marines need supplies to survive. They need food and other essentials. These supplies are sent by ships. And increasingly, such missions have become tricky because China blocks or targets supply ships. Reports say around this shipwreck, there were about 100 Chinese ships. When they see a Philippine ship, they threaten it. They fire water cannons. And that's exactly what happened over the weekend. This collision happened near the second Thomas Shoal. The world can see who the aggressor is. The Chinese Coast Guard. They were the aggressors, but they're blaming Manila for what happened.
Despite warnings, the Philippine vessels insisted on intruding into the lagoon and colliding with the Chinese maritime police vessels in a dangerous manner.
Manila has refused to use force so far, but China is not showing any restraint. It is resorting to aggressive tactics, raising the threat of another conflict, one that the world cannot afford, one that China most certainly cannot afford. Today was a big day at India's Supreme Court. An important case was on the docket, the case of Kashmir and Article 370. The case was made up of around 23 petitions. They dealt with a lot of complicated issues and questions, but the most important one was this. Was abrogating Article 370 constitutional or not? That was the question. 5 judges were part of this bench, and all of them said yes. Abrogating Article 370 was constitutional. It did not violate Indian laws or the Indian Constitution. Listen to what the Chief Justice said.
Article 370 is a temporary provision on a reading of the historical context in which it was included. The state of Jammu and Kashmir does not have internal sovereignty which is distinguishable from the powers and privileges enjoyed by other states in the country.
Now for some background. Article 370 was part of the Indian Constitution. It gave special powers to Jammu and Kashmir, like which laws would apply there and so on. They had special powers, but in 2019, the central government abrogated it. They said no more special powers. Also, Jammu and Kashmir was split up. One state was divided into two union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. These were the two union territories. Now, critics say this move was unconstitutional, which is why they approached the Supreme Court of India. And today the court gave the verdict. They said the move was legal. The abrogation of Article 370, the division of the state into union territories, it was all legal. This verdict was based on two basic facts. Number one, Article 370 or special powers was temporary. It was not meant to last forever. And number two, Jammu and Kashmir does not have sovereignty of its own. Yes, it had a special agreement, but that agreement did not mean any sort of sovereignty. Hence, removing Article 370 was constitutional. That's what the court said. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has praised the verdict. He called it a declaration of hope and progress. What about the political parties in Kashmir? They've expressed disappointment. Most of them said the fight will continue. The fight for statehood and for special powers. They'll keep pushing for it. But tonight, we do not want to dwell on the politics. I'm sure you've seen and heard enough of it. Tonight, we're looking at Kashmir's journey since 2019, the good and the bad. Let's look at the economy first. In 2019, Jammu and Kashmir's economic output was 1 lakh crore rupees. And now, it is more than 2,27,000 crore rupees. So it's more than doubled. The economic survey is predicting another bump. It says the output will double again in 5 years. Same with tourism. Around 18 million tourists visited Jammu and Kashmir in 2022. It was an all-time high, a record. But looks like this year will be even better. Footfall is expected to be 22 million by the end of 2023, by the end of this month. So again, great news. Foreign investments are also trickling in. Earlier this year, the UAE's Emaar Group struck a deal. We're talking about the makers of Burj Khalifa. That's the Emaar Group. They will be investing around 500 crore rupees in Kashmir. The plan is for a shopping mall near Srinagar. It could generate up to 10,000 jobs. So the economy is doing well. What about security? That's always been a big issue in Kashmir. Well, the numbers from the Home Ministry are positive. They've compared two periods, from 2016 to 2019 and from 2019 to 2022. And here's what they found. Terror attacks are down 32%. Civilian deaths are down 14%. And deaths of security officers have fallen by 52%. Even stone pelting is down. More than 600 pelting incidents were reported in the first half of 2019. By 2021, it was down to 76, from 600 to 76. So the overall security has improved. But is it perfect? Of course not. Targeted killings have emerged as a problem. Kashmiri Hindus and non-Kashmiris have been targeted. So that issue very much remains. And so does the question of elections. Jammu and Kashmir's last legislative elections were held in 2014. It's been nearly a decade. There is talk of an election next year, but no dates have been set, which is why the Supreme Court waded in today. They've issued a directive to the Election Commission of India, hold elections by the end of September 2024. Hold elections by then. They also had a directive for the central government, restore Kashmir's statehood soon. And that was the promise made in 2019, that the post-abrogation period would be used to do important work on security, on the economy, on the politics, all of it. But after that, statehood would be restored. So the top court wants the government to follow through, to do what they said they would. Now, this judgment will be talked about in the future. Lawyers will quote it. Political parties will campaign on it. It will be discussed threadbare. But it's important to remember one thing. This verdict is not the end. It's just one part of Kashmir's long and rich history. The end would be a prosperous and safe Kashmir. One that was promised in 1947 and again in 2019. Now let's turn our attention to Egypt. The land of the pharaohs is going to polls with about 112 million citizens. It's the most populous Arab nation in the world, Egypt. By far the most populous. About 25% of all Arab people live in this country. It's also the third most populous African country. So the politics of Egypt has a huge impact on the region and the world. And now it's in the middle of an election. Voting is being held over 3 days. 67 million Egyptians are eligible to vote. They will decide on the country's next president. There are 4 candidates in the fray. 3 relatively minor players. And the 4th is the incumbent president, General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. He has ruled Egypt since 2014. That's when he overthrew the previous president, Mohamed Morsi. And this makes el-Sisi sound like a military dictator, but it's more complicated than that. Let me explain. In 2011, we saw the Arab Spring. That's when Arab countries revolted against dictators. Egypt was ruled by Hosni Mubarak then, a military dictator who'd been in power for almost 30 years. He was ousted after the Arab Spring. And a few months later, in 2012, elections were held, and Mohamed Morsi became president. He was also a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, an organization with ties to Hamas, an organization considered extremist and now banned in Egypt. So Morsi was ousted by the military, and in came President al-Sisi. He helped bring stability to Egypt. He brought in a form of military rule that Egypt was perhaps used to, and he's remained president since. And now he's standing for a 3rd consecutive presidential term. If he wins, he will be in power till 2030. The elections began yesterday, they will run till Tuesday, and we should have the results by the 18th of December. Egyptians have been lining up to cast their vote. Many of them think it is their moral duty.
I am doing my electoral duty as an Egyptian citizen who cares about his country, its stability and the course of success that all Egyptians inside the country are seeking.
I came just now and found this large turnout. This is great. I'm calling on everyone to come out and participate. This is our precedent and this is our country, and we have to preserve it. Irrespective of the problems that we are facing, we are still better off than others, and we need to preserve this condition that we are in.
He spoke about the trouble that Egypt is going through, one of these people, but also how it's better off than its neighbors. Let me break that down for you. You see, Egypt has been facing an economic crisis for a while now. Since last March, the local currency has been on decline. That's the Egyptian pound. Its value against the US dollar is half of what it was last year. And this has caused turmoil. Inflation was officially at 38.5% in October, slightly below the 40.3% in September. And this is partially due to the currency devaluation. Egypt, in fact, imports billions of dollars worth of food. In 2021, they spent over $4.5 billion to import wheat. $4.5 billion for wheat alone. Last year, we saw the beginning of the war in Ukraine, and wheat prices shot up. Food prices in general shot up. And this took a toll on Egypt's import bill. So the currency went down and the food bill went up. All of this is weighing heavily on Egypt's economy. It is leading to real hardship for the people. But here's the silver lining. They're better off than their neighbors. And who are the neighbors? Countries torn by war like Sudan, Libya, Yemen, and of course Gaza. Egypt is an oasis of stability in this region. It is critical to resolving the crisis in Gaza. In fact, experts say the war in Gaza has affected the election in Egypt. The country's domestic problems have now taken a backseat.
Gaza war was a major boost for President Sisi, and like many other countries in the world, in the cases of external threat, in the case of a war, people tend to rally behind the leader.
Before the events of Gaza, the pressure on economic and the living conditions as well as other issues were questioned by people and had created a state of anger against President Sisi and big reservations against his policies. Since the beginning of the events in Gaza, though, there has been a state of calm and tranquility in the minds of many who started to feel that it was better if the current president continues.
The Egyptian president has often been accused of cracking down on dissent, of targeting the opposition, of tightening his grip on power, but no one is raising these objections right now. As the war in Gaza continues, Egypt needs stability. It is crucial for getting aid into the Gaza Strip and for negotiating with all the geopolitical players here. Egypt was the first Arab nation to recognize Israel. It shares decent ties with the West. It is also a major Arab player that borders Gaza. All these points make it the perfect middleman in the current crisis. In this situation, Al-Sisi's re-election is pretty much guaranteed. Right now, the world needs a stable Egypt, and this man is their best bet. Now let's talk about NATO. The war in Ukraine gave this alliance a new lease of life. Its biggest strength is the principle of collective defense. When one NATO member is attacked, everyone mobilizes. It is seen as an attack on all of them. And that requires NATO to be battle ready at all times. But today the military alliance seems unprepared. The war in Ukraine has depleted the arsenal of NATO members. There is a shortage of military supplies, and concerns are growing. Is NATO battle ready? Is it prepared for the next threat? How soon can it ramp up military production? Is the war in Ukraine weakening this alliance? Our next report explores.
In November, ministers from Europe gathered in Brussels. Their effort to support Ukraine against Russia was stumbling. The delivery of military equipment had slowed down. European powers had promised 1 million rounds to Kyiv. Ukrainians need the ammo to keep the Russians at bay. But the German defense minister had a grim update.
It's safe to assume that the 1 million rounds will not be reached. There have been voices that have said to be careful, because 1 million is easy to decide and the money is there. But the production has to be there. Unfortunately, these other voices are right.
This wasn't surprising. Ukraine had been using up the ammo way too quickly, and the manufacturers have struggled to keep up. This revelation exposed a vulnerability. Europe has fallen behind in defense manufacturing, and that leaves NATO more vulnerable. When Russia invaded Ukraine, several NATO powers stepped up to help, the likes of the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and others. They dipped into their massive weapons stockpiles and shared equipment worth billions with Kyiv. The war is now entering its third year, and the inventories of key NATO powers are now depleted. Going by one assessment, the British military now has just 150 deployable tanks and just a dozen serviceable long-range artillery pieces. France is in the same boat. It has fewer than 90 heavy artillery pieces. Denmark has none. The Danish forces are also short on submarines and air defense systems. What about Germany? Its ammo stockpile could be dangerously low. Reports say if there is a wider conflict and German forces are forced to fight, their ammo supplies will last for just 2 days. The shortage is serious. Senior NATO officials have issued alarming indictments, like Admiral Rob Bauer. He chairs NATO's military committee. In October, he called on Europe to ramp up its production. He declared the bottom of the barrel is now visible, and more weapons need to be manufactured at a much faster pace. But that's easier said than done. NATO heavily relies on the United States for weapons and the money. In 2022, the US accounted for nearly 70% of NATO's defense spending. So if push comes to shove, the US will be asked to do the heavy lifting. The question is, can Washington bear the burden? It is supporting allies in 2 conflict zones now, Ukraine and Israel in West Asia. One estimate claims the US has already given away a third of its stockpile. In October, the Pentagon issued a warning to Congress. It came through a letter. It said the Pentagon is running low on cash, and supplies to some troops in Ukraine had slowed down. This month, the US Defense Secretary asked lawmakers to help.
I hope that Congress will soon pass the President's urgent national security supplemental request, which would include another $50 billion to flow through the U.S. industrial base.
The money is yet to come. America's NATO allies are keeping an eye on developments, hoping they won't be left in the lurch if a conflict breaks out.
In Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif is talking about peace. We've heard that before, but this time He's campaigning on it. Pakistan's elections are slated for February 2024. All bets are on Nawaz Sharif. He returned to Pakistan in October. He's got the army support this time, and his chief rival Imran Khan is in jail. It is the definition of a state-managed election. So the question is, why is he talking about peace with India? It's never been a winning strategy in Pakistan, so why is Sharif doing it? First, listen to his statement over the weekend.
हमारे दौर में इंडिया के दो वज़ीर आज़म यहाँ पाकिस्तान तशरीफ़ लाए, मोदी साहब और वाजपेयी साहब। इससे पहले कब कभी कोई आया था? और ये कैसे मुमकिन है कि आपके जो है वो हमसाए तो आपसे नाराज़ हों या आप उनसे नाराज़ हों, और उस नाराज़गी के अंदर आप रह के तो आप दुनिया में कोई मकाम हासिल करें? आप अपने मामलात को हमें इंडिया के साथ भी ठीक करना है, अपने मामलात को हमने अफ़गानिस्तान के साथ भी ठीक करना है, हमने अपने मामलात को ईरान के साथ भी मजबूत करना है।
And he did not stop there. Nawaz Sharif also talked about the Kargil war. He was Pakistan's prime minister back then, and his role has been heavily debated. Did he know but disapprove, or did he support? Sharif says he did push back against the generals, and that is why he was toppled in 1999.
मुझे पता लगना चाहिए कि 1999 में क्यों निकाला गया, कि हमने जो है वो मामलात को सही तरह संभाला, और हमने अपना कहा कि हम ये कारगिल में लड़ाई नहीं होनी चाहिए थी, इसलिए निकाल दिया।
Seems like a virus going around. First, Imran Khan started praising India. He brought sound bites of India's foreign minister to his rallies. Then Nawaz Sharif joined in. In September, he was all praises for New Delhi. He talked about India's moon landing and the G20 summit. Of course, this is all campaign talk. It's what they do in office that really matters. But elsewhere, Pakistan is chasing a reset, like with the United States. Army Chief Asim Munir is heading to the US. It's his first trip to America after taking office in 2022. He's visited Saudi Arabia. He's visited China and the UAE, but he did not visit the United States before this. And while there, he will hold talks with senior politicians and military officers. It follows some key defense deals between Pakistan and the US. First was an F-16 upgrade package. It was approved last year. The package was worth around $450 million. The second was signed this year, that too in a very secretive manner. Reports say it could set the stage for more military purchases. So Pakistan and the US are doing business again. This was not the case after the fall of Kabul. The Biden administration was unhappy with Imran Khan. In fact, Joe Biden did not have a single phone conversation with Imran Khan, not even one. Imagine that, 2 years, 0 phone calls. So why the U-turn now? Islamabad needs American help with bailouts. Plus, Chinese funding is not really up to the mark. This year, Beijing refused multiple projects proposed by Pakistan. So what does Islamabad do? Attempt a reset. Could that also be one reason for the sudden outreach to India? Well, Washington has not said very much. They say they support direct talks between India and Pakistan, but beyond that, nothing. But recently, New Delhi and Islamabad have found themselves in similar circles. They both buy Russian energy. They're both close to the US. And now Pakistan wants to join the BRICS. So I come back to my question. Why is Pakistan talking about peace with India, and why now? 2024 is election year in Pakistan, India and the US, so major foreign policy changes are very unlikely. New Delhi hinted at the same last week. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson was asked about Pakistan's attempt to join the BRICS. Listen to the response.
इस पर्टिकुलर एप्लीकेशन के बारे में मेरा कोई कमेंट नहीं है, बट मैं सिर्फ ये कहना चाहता हूँ, आपने पर्टिकुलरली कहा कि कुछ मित्र देशों ने सपोर्ट किया, मैं ये कहना चाहता हूँ और हाईलाइट करना चाहता हूँ कि जो ब्रिक्स की डिसीजंस होती हैं, उसके जो निर्णय लिए जाते हैं, वो सारे कंसेंसस के बेसिस में होता है। मैं इतना ही कहना चाहता हूँ, आप इसका इशारा समझ ही सकते हैं।
So no change in New Delhi, and why would there be? India's position has always been clear. Act on terror, clear up your business, and then we can sit down and talk. So Pakistan needs to show progress. Whether it's on cutting support to terror groups or stopping anti-India propaganda. Without that, there can be no reset with India. Nawaz Sharif could be the man for the job. He has a history of progress with India, but the question is, does he have the army's blessings for this? And now let's turn our attention to West Africa and the long drawn-out saga of the Niger coup. The military took over Niger in late July and immediately there was a backlash, not so much from the citizens but from two other parties. The country's former colonizer, France, and the economic bloc of West African nations. It's called ECOWAS. Now, ECOWAS was furious. They gave Niger's junta a deadline to restore democracy, to reinstate the ousted president, Mohamed Bazoum. Else, they said, they would intervene militarily. None of it happened, though. The president remains ousted, and the ECOWAS military never came. Instead, they imposed sanctions, and they continued saber-rattling. Niger paid them no heed. And now it seems the West African powers are giving up. Are they going soft on the coup leaders? Our next report has the answer.
ECOWAS stands for the Economic Community of West African States. It's a regional grouping of 15 countries. 4 of these members have been suspended in the last 2 years. Why? Because of an epidemic of coups. The military has overthrown the elected government in 4 ECOWAS member states: Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Niger. This isn't just the last 3 years. Mali has seen 2 coups. So has Burkina Faso. Niger became the 4th coup-hit West African nation earlier this year, and these overthrows have become a headache for the regional bloc. Niger seemed to be the last straw. ECOWAS was up in arms, literally. It issued an ultimatum. The group threatened a military intervention in Niger to return the elected president, Mohamed Bazoum, to power. The deadline was set for August, and it came and went with no military action. Instead, ECOWAS imposed economic sanctions on Niger, planning to force out the junta with economic warfare instead. That hasn't worked either. So now ECOWAS is softening its stance further.
I would like to reiterate the imperative of the regions to continue to re-engage under the military rule and basis of realistic and short transition plan that can deliver democracy and good governance. No alternative. On our part, we should be prepared to provide them with technical and material support to ensure the achievement of these strategic goals.
That's Nigeria's president, Bola Tinubu, the current chair of ECOWAS. He was one of the most adamant when it came to punishing the Niger junta. Now he's talking about re-engaging.
The authority decides to set up a committee of heads of state made up of the president and head of state of the Republic of Togo, the president and the head of state of the Republic of Sierra Leone, the president and head of state of the Republic of Benin, to engage with CNSP and other stakeholders.
The CNSP translates to the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland. It's the name Niger's ruling junta is using. During yesterday's meeting, ECOWAS finally agreed to engage with the junta. This means 2 things. 1, it has officially recognized it as the present government of Niger, and 2, ECOWAS seems to have finally given up on returning the ousted Mohamed Bazoum to power. That's not all. To ensure Bazoum's release and put in place a short timeline for the return of democracy, ECOWAS is dangling both a carrot and a stick before the junta. If Niger releases Bazoum, sanctions will be lifted. If not, they will continue. He also said the threat of force will remain if Niger does not comply with the ECOWAS Commission. Since ECOWAS hasn't really done anything forceful yet, that threat may not really work. But the lifting of sanctions would help the people of Niger. The restrictions to trade have hurt the economy, and ordinary people are paying the price. If the junta refuses to engage with ECOWAS, it could hurt their support. But are humanitarian considerations the only reason for ECOWAS softening its stance? Or is something else at play?
It is important that we also review some development in our sub-region, including the move by some of our members under military rule to float an alliance of Sahel states.
3 of the coup-hit West African nations have formed an alliance: Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. They are working together to fight terrorism in the Sahel region. And reports say they've been making gains. Does ECOWAS want to stop the coup-hit nations from becoming successful on their own? Or does it want to stop them from inspiring similar coups in other West African nations, like the recent attempts in Sierra Leone and Guinea-Bissau? Whatever the reason, ECOWAS seems to have come to the negotiating table. We'll see if this helps in reversing the trend of coups in the region.
Now let's look at the Israel-Hamas war, a war that no side seems to be winning. The people of Gaza are dying by the thousands. Hamas is losing territory and infrastructure. Israel is chasing a goal that may backfire. Netanyahu's position is precarious, and for the US president, it may cost him the next election. In the next 4 minutes, we'll explain. Let's start with some history. Let me take you back to the year 1987. That's when the first Intifada began, the first Palestinian uprising. The protests broke out spontaneously. They weren't led by any group or individual. These were protests against Israel. And they led to the creation of an Islamic resistance movement, aka Hamas. Cut to 2023, this year. Hamas rules Gaza. It has carried out terrorist attacks, and it is fighting a war with Israel. 66 days and counting, this war has been on. Israel says it will continue until they eradicate Hamas. But is that even possible? Hamas was born out of a cycle of violence. Can more violence end it? Or will it give birth to another Hamas? Qatar thinks it will. Their Prime Minister has spoken about this. He says this conflict could radicalize a whole new generation.
Seeing these images right now that's coming out of Gaza every day is not just affecting those forces which are in Lebanon, Yemen, or in Iraq,
Iran.
But it also affects an entire generation that might be radicalized because of these images, and seeing the international community not responding responsibly to it.
You may have a point there. The numbers are appalling. In Gaza, nearly 18,000 people have been killed. A child is killed every 10 minutes, according to some reports. 1 million people have been displaced. Israel says it wants to destroy Hamas and protect civilians, but that's not really what's happening. Hamas uses civilians as human shields. A lot of them are children. They did not vote for Hamas. They did not attack Israel, but they are victims in this war. Will this violence radicalize them and create a Hamas 2.0? We ask because history is full of such examples, of such vicious cycles of violence. Take the US invasion of Iraq. It is said to have given birth to the ISIS. Then there were the Gaza wars. Since 2008, Gazans have gone from one war to another, suffering death and destruction. An unemployment rate touching 50%. So many young men joined the Hamas. They lost their families, they had no jobs, they were easy to radicalize. And this war could lead to more such cases. Russia too has warned of this. It says fighting could lead to more radicalization and more terrorist activity. A bit rich coming from Russia, considering they're fighting a war of their own. But the MI5 thinks so too. And UN experts have raised this issue. They say that Israel's attempt to wipe out Hamas could lead to another resistance. So the warnings are all there from multiple quarters, but Israel remains undeterred. Their goal is fixed: destroy Hamas and take control of Gaza. And what happens next? Who will run the Gaza Strip? Prime Minister Netanyahu says Israel could control Gaza for an indefinite period. They did the same till 2005. It was a precarious control that met with a violent pushback. In 2005, Israel left and Hamas was elected by a landslide. So will this time be different? Also, occupying Gaza would be a controversial move. International support for Israel's offensive is already waning. US President Biden says reoccupation would be a big mistake. His Israel policy is backfiring. His voters are leaving him. They disapprove of Biden's support to Israel. And his own party, the Democrats, are divided. They fear that this war could cost them the White House. Look at the opinion polls. Here's the latest from the Wall Street Journal. It shows Biden at 43% and his rival Donald Trump at 47%. So Trump is leading by 4 points, and that is not good news for the US president. Usually, the incumbent has all the advantage in America, but that's not the case this time. The elections are still 10 months away, and Trump could extend his lead. So Joe Biden is recalibrating his support to Israel. On October 7th, after the Hamas attack, Biden said, America has Israel's back. But now, he has his own back to watch. And now to the big headline from Australia. The land down under has an over-the-top problem. I'm talking about migration. It has climbed to record levels in Australia. It is adding pressure to housing, pushing rents to their highest levels and increasing infrastructure woes. So the country has come up with a plan. Cut down immigration by 50%. Australia wants to have its migrant intake within 2 years. It plans to crack down on student visas and unskilled migration. But this comes with a challenge. Australia is struggling with a shortage of skilled workers. So by restricting migration, how will it invite them, skilled workers? Also, if you're planning to move to Australia, should you be concerned about all of this? Our next report tells you.
The pandemic was brutal. Most countries reacted to it with a common coping mechanism: strict border controls. Australia was part of this list. It restricted border movements during the pandemic. Inflow of people to the country reduced. It kept foreign students and workers out for nearly 2 years. And businesses faced a shortage of staff. But now the pandemic is over. Borders have long opened. And people are flocking to the land down under in record numbers. A record 510,000 people came to Australia from June 2022 to June this year. So the annual migration numbers have boosted dramatically. Sounds like good news, right? Well, it isn't. As they say, be careful what you wish for. And that's exactly what's playing out in Australia. Record level migration is putting pressure on the housing market, which has already become a growing crisis. Rents are skyrocketing, growing at their fastest rates in decades. They've increased by 7.6% in a year, the highest since 2009. Homelessness is also on the rise in the country. There's a cost of living crunch, and inflation is stubbornly high.
It's not just about this moment and the experience of migration our country is having at this time. We've got some really big national challenges that we face as a country.
Now the government has a plan. It wants a clampdown on migration. The Australian government says it will halve the migration intake within 2 years. If all goes according to plan, then migration will drop to 375,000 in 2024 and 250,000 by 2025, which will be roughly in line with the pre-pandemic levels in the country.
We are going to make sure that we bring numbers back under control, that we build a better planned system around essential things like housing, and perhaps most importantly of all, that we build a program that delivers for the national interest.
It sounds like a plan Australia needs. But is this good news for people who are planning to move there? This plan will affect some people more than others. Australia plans to crack down on student visas and unskilled migration. Simply put, visa rules for international students and low-skilled workers will be tightened. There will be tougher minimum English language requirements and more scrutiny on those applying for a second visa. But there's a slight issue here. Australia may be struggling under the burden of a lot of migrants, but it's still short of skilled workers. So with tougher migration rules, how will the country attract them? Cue the Skills in Demand visa. This is a new specialist visa. It's set to be brought in by next year. Essentially, it will speed up the entry of highly skilled workers in Australia. The processing time will be set at 1 week, which will pave the road to permanent residency. For now, the Skills in Demand visa is still under the works. But if all goes well, it will help rope in the skilled workers Australia needs, while other migration policies will reduce the burden on the country.
We have a plan to fix migration by ensuring Australia can get the skilled workers that Australia needs but putting an end to any abuse and any rorts.
According to reports, Australia's immigration process is badly broken. It's unnecessarily complex, slow and inefficient. So, could this be the reform it desperately needs? To use a cliché, only time will tell.
I'm sure you've heard of Murphy's Law. It says anything that can go wrong will go wrong. In some formulations, this law is extended further. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and at the worst possible time, or what many call Mondays. Every week a Monday comes around and all hell breaks loose. You wake up on the wrong side of the bed, the coffee makes it a point to burn your tongue, and the snail-paced traffic has a vendetta against you. But don't worry, you're not alone. According to studies, Monday is the worst day of the week for millions of people. People around the world suffer from what we call Monday blues. They feel down at the start of the week, and under the banner of Monday blues, people legitimately complain. The question is, are Monday blues even real? And if they are, how do you beat them? Our next report tells you.
Do you have a case of the Mondays? Is a sense of dread looming over you as you go through the day? Does the commute to school or the office seem extra taxing? Are co-workers more boring than usual today? If you can relate, either you're Garfield, the cartoon character, or you're suffering from the Monday blues. What does that mean, you ask? The Monday blues are when you feel down at the start of the week. You may feel anxious or low. Even a minor irritation can seem massive, and dad jokes can become an actual trigger point. But if you have the Monday blues, don't worry, you aren't alone. According to studies, millions of people the world over hate Mondays. It's the worst day of the week for them, and such people unabashedly groan and moan. So much so that Monday may as well be renamed a Moan Day, pardon the pun. Songs are written over the Monday blues. They also have their own day, Blue Monday. It comes on the first day in the third week of January every year. But the golden question is, are Monday blues even a real thing? Scientifically speaking, not really. Monday blues is not a medical term, but research says they can feel quite real. According to a 2020 study, most employees feel emotionally compromised on Mondays. They have lower levels of job satisfaction and higher levels of job stress. According to another study of 2,000 British adults, more than half felt the Monday blues. They admitted to spending more than half an hour each Monday complaining. This was a sharp uptick from an average of 22 minutes of whining every other day of the week. So what causes the Monday blues? Job dissatisfaction and burnout are significant contributors. But the biggest reason is a disruptive weekend. You party hard or simply catch up with Netflix and sleep in late. This changes the natural rhythm of the body, making it tougher to get back on track on Mondays. In fact, Sundays make matters worse. According to research, our mood tends to begin improving after Monday. It peaks on Saturday, but then begins crashing again. On Sundays, many people get the Sunday scaries, meaning they begin dreading Mondays in advance. Psychologists have a fancy term for this. They call it anticipatory anxiety. In one study, 81% of the respondents became progressively more anxious as their Sunday came to a close. Nearly 2/3 reported restless sleep on Sunday nights. Chances are you felt this way at least a couple of times. As Mondays approach, you begin to lose that sense of freedom, which is replaced by lethargy and agony. But remember, Monday blues are not a scientific illness. They're only as real as you make it. And here's the truth. Mondays are only repercussions of your weekend choices. So don't go too off track on the weekends. It could do you wonders on Mondays. Just remember, Moan Day misery is a choice. So choose wisely.
Well, Monday blues are a real thing, but here's the good news. For half of the world, this Monday is over. Now it's time for Vantage shots. Images that tell the story. In Australia, a whale joined beachgoers for a swim near the shore. In Argentina, new president Javier Milei stopped a presidential motorcade to greet a dog on the street. And in Hungary, thousands tripped for the Santa Run, braving freezing temperatures. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1936, Britain's King Edward VIII abdicated the throne for love. He was the first British monarch to do this voluntarily. He did it to marry American divorcee Wallis Simpson. Back then, marrying a divorcee was a strict no for the royal family. Leaving you on that note, thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
His Royal Highness Prince Edward. A few hours ago, I discharged my last duty as King and Emperor. And now that I have been succeeded by my brother,